Isaiah, and thanks, Gareth. I was part of the organizing with that remote platform, so it was certainly a new learning experience. Okay, I'm presenting on behalf of myself, Patricia, and Leila on the bioinformatics training and where we've gotten to. So if you recall, Bioschemas exercise has been to create a set of minimum requirements for posting bioinformatics course and training materials on a website, as Patricia talked about, for making things fair. Our starting point has always been schema.org profiles, from which we select relevant properties needed to describe what we want, the course instance, and training material, and assign a marginality to those properties, minimum, recommended, or optional. So the history of how I got involved in Bioschemas in terms of leading the particular profiles. In December 2019, Niall announced that he was departing his role, and a request was received from Niall and Terry that myself and Gabry in Cambridge take over the leadership of the Bioschemas training group. Thus, it would give a representation of North America and Europe. And the tasks that we were assigned by Niall were to shepherd 2 sites to adopt the Bioschemas profiles for course instance, and training material. The proposed sites were bioinformatics.ca, TESS, and GTN. And then once adopted, reach out to Bioschemas to move the specifications from draft to current, and to publish a paper on the effort. In February 2020, I met with Gabry to revisit which 2 sites would be adopting the training profiles. We decided that H3A BioNet and SIB were further ahead in terms of adopting. And we also identified that test scraping from various websites, that scraping protocol would need to be updated to reflect the changes in the Bioschemas. So Gabry and I had periodic meetings throughout 2020, from February, because we're still in 2020 now. I checked in with H3A BioNet, and Gabry was to have checked in with SIB. However, this is where the problem started. I discovered that Gabry also departed her position, and that SIB had been trying to engage Bioschemas training team on issues she had with relation to implementation, but no response was received. And this is because the role was never transferred to myself. So here we are here today. Myself, Patricia, and Leila lead the Bioschemas training profile and implementation team. What we have done to date is meet once per week. We've reviewed a whole bunch of implementation issues. We had questions around how course and course instance are related to each other, how to use multiple properties that seem similar, how to deal with properties that don't exist in schema.org. We've also reviewed the draft in the Bioschemas Google folder. We've discovered the deletion and loss of certain files in the Google folder. There's been mismatches from the web display of our training profiles and the Google Sheets that in behind it. We've also discovered enormous mismatches between the properties in those Google files and what comes from schema.org. So it's been a long process, and I'll just step through some of it and tell you where we're at. We've had a lot of guidance from Phil Barker at Bioschemas on how to define properties and use them. So one of the first issues was the relationship between course and course instance. So course is a creative work It is a specification that must be used in tandem with Courselnstance, and it describes a broad common aspects of a recurring training event. Courselnstance is the event of that creative work, and this specification can be used in tandem with a course. A course instance is about a specific time and location of when a course is held. The other issue was about similar properties. So properties like about, description, abstract, and keywords. About refers to EDAM terms relevant to a course, such as a computer science course. Keywords are free text related to the EDAM course that are a bit more descriptive than EDAM. So it might be, if it's a computer science course that we're talking about, it's an introductory Unix. So you can use those keywords. Description provides other details about the course. It might be upcoming course in fall 2020. And an abstract gives a bit better context to what the course is going to cover. So this course provides an introduction to Unix and file management from the command line. Other similar terms that were a bit confusing: duration and time required, and the difference being in how they're applied. Duration is applied to course and Courselnstance, something that might occur for a given duration of time. Your course is going to take 4 months or 30 months, and the time required is applied to training materials, that it will take you approximately this amount of time to get through this particular training document. We also had to deal with introduction of new properties. So one example is we were trying to introduce skill level to capture the skills that are needed to participate in a course or Courselnstance. We want beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and don't want necessarily grade 12, a master's, which describes the education level. Feedback from Bioschemas indicated that we could use the property education level, which does encompass skill level, and we just have to specify the controlled vocabulary of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So we can use education level with a controlled vocabulary. Another new property that we were trying to introduce is uses, because we're trying to capture usage of other materials or tools in a training material. So an example is a training exercise uses Galaxy, not mentions Galaxy. Bioschemas suggested that we consider other properties like associated material and reference material, but these didn't really adequately capture the essence of uses. Associated material is something that's associated, doesn't describe its active use. Reference material, again, doesn't really describe active use. So the decision that Patricia, Leila, and I decided upon is that we will use the property mentions and be explicit again in the description, saying that you must actively use another resource in a given training material, so that a training exercise mentions Galaxy, and that property can be used only if Galaxy is actively used in that training material. Our biggest thing, once we discovered that a whole bunch of files were deleted from the Bioschemas Google Drive, was to go through and recreate those files. And we started that exercise using the website as the position of where Bioschemas was last left off. And in doing that, we had to cross-check against the properties from which we were trying to identify a minimum set. And in doing that, we referenced back to schema.org and discovered an enormous amount of difficulties. In here, I'm highlighting in blue fields that were missing or incorrect relative to bioschemas schema.org, and in yellow, identification of missing examples. And this is just one view of a long file, and there are 3 profiles that we were trying to do. So there was quite a lot of difficulty with the source content. So Layla, Patricia, and I divided up the materials. Each of us took a different profile. Each of us thoroughly cleaned up the profile, ensuring that it all reflected what exists in schema.org, that it makes sense for bioschema descriptions, that we're not introducing properties that shouldn't be there, and that aren't in schema.org to begin with. We are correcting the marginality and cardinality of those properties, adding missing examples, and really just cleaning up a whole bunch of content. The end result is that not much has changed. It's just been a lot of cleanup. The minimums for course remain the same. We're ensuring that we have a name, description, and keywords that describe a course. The same for course instance. The minimums remain the same. We need a location and course mode to describe a course instance. And for training material, again, the minimums remain the same. We need a name, description, and keywords that describe that particular training material. Our next steps are to discuss the use of course instead of discuss the use of course instead of our definition of course. So in schema.org, there exists a profile called course. In schema.org, there also exists a profile education event, which could be used instead of course instance. And we need to discuss the use of the profile in schema.org learning resource rather than training material. The exercise that Layla, Patricia, and I need to do is to confirm that each of those existing profiles actually contain what we want them to contain. Otherwise, we default to what we have already done. We're going to finalize the clean drafts of profiles in the Bioschemas Google folder, ask Bioschemas to review and push the corrected content to the website, and then we can start back again with the implementation teams, ensuring that they have the correct drafts and that they are able to implement at their sites. Then we will again reach out to Bioschemas to move training profiles from draft to current status, and then publish a paper. So that's where we're at, and I will open it up to discussion because I'd like to hear from all of you. And